Welcome to this tranquil space, a sanctuary where we journey together toward restful sleep. If you've ever found yourself lying awake, your mind tangled in the worries of the day, take comfort. You are not alone. These restless moments touch us all, but within them lies an invitation to find peace, to let go, and to embrace stillness. In my own search for calm, I discovered the timeless beauty of Bible stories. These sacred tales, rich with wisdom and hope, have a unique way of quieting the mind and soothing the soul. They remind us of God's abiding love, the power of faith, and the peace that comes from knowing we are never alone. Tonight, I invite you to set aside your cares, settle into a place of rest, and let these stories guide you into a serene and comforting space. For this evening's journey, I've chosen 10 stories from the Bible, each one a source of hope, comfort, and gentle reassurance. Together, we'll explore their messages, drawing closer to the peace they offer. Let us begin with the very first story, the creation of the world. A story of beginnings filled with beauty, order, and infinite care. Close your eyes, take a deep, calming breath, and allow yourself to be drawn into this sacred moment as I guide you through it. In the beginning, there was nothing, just a vast, empty darkness. Silence, stillness. And then, God spoke. With a voice full of power and love, He said, "Let there be light." And suddenly, there it was, light. Bright, warm, and golden, piercing through the darkness. It was as if the whole universe had taken a deep breath and come alive. God looked at the light and smiled. He saw that it was good, so good. He decided to separate the light from the darkness, naming the light day and the darkness night. That was the very first day, a day when nothing turned into something, when chaos gave way to beauty. When the first day ended, God wasn't done yet. On the second day, His voice rang out again. He said, "Let there be a sky to separate the waters." Imagine this scene, a soft, endless expanse of blue stretching high above, creating a perfect dome over the earth. The sky was vast and serene, a place for clouds to float and birds to one day soar. God looked at the sky He had created, and once again, He smiled. It was good, peaceful, calm, and just right. The third day arrived, and the world was still mostly water, shimmering and restless. But God had more plans. He said, "Let the waters gather together, and let dry ground appear." Slowly the waters began to shift, revealing stretches of land. Mountains rose majestically, and soft rolling hills appeared. God named the dry ground land, and the gathered waters seas. But He wasn't finished. God looked at the land and thought it needed something more, something alive. He spoke again, and lush green grass sprouted across the earth. Trees rose tall and strong, their branches reaching for the sky. Flowers of every color and fragrance bloomed, turning the barren ground into a vibrant paradise. Can you picture it? The gentle rustle of leaves, the soft fragrance of blossoms, the sound of waves meeting the shore. It was a world coming to life, and God saw that it was good. So very good. The fourth day, lights in the sky. Now the earth had land, seas, and plants, but something was missing. God looked up at the sky and said, "Let there be lights to mark the days, seasons, and years." And just like that, the sun blazed into existence, casting its golden glow over the earth and warming its surface. The moon followed, rising softly to light up the night, its gentle beams bringing calm to the dark. Then came the stars, countless and twinkling, scattered like diamonds across the heavens. Imagine lying beneath that sky, gazing up at the sun's brilliance by day and the moon and stars' quiet beauty by night. God saw it all and knew it was good. On the fifth day, God turned his attention to the waters and the skies. He said, "Let the seas teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth." And the waters came alive. Fish of every size and color darted through the seas. Dolphins leaped gracefully above the waves, and whales sang their deep, mysterious songs. The skies filled with life too. Eagles soared majestically. Tiny sparrows flitted among the trees, and colorful parrots spread their wings wide. God smiled as he watched the world life, its beauty unfolding with every moment. It was good, abundantly, wonderfully good. When the sixth day dawned, God had one more extraordinary creation in mind. He said, "Let the land produce living creatures." Suddenly the earth was alive with animals. Lions roared, sheep grazed quietly in the meadows, and elephants lumbered across the plains. From the tiniest insects to the mightiest beasts, the land was teeming with life. But God wasn't finished. He had one more creation, one unlike any other. With great care he formed a man from the dust of the ground. Imagine his hands shaping every detail. The curve of the hands, the strength in the legs, the gentle rise and fall of the chest. Then God leaned in and breathed life into the man, and the man opened his eyes. This man, named Adam, was special. He was made in God's image, capable of love, thought, and deep connection. But God saw that Adam needed a companion. So while Adam slept, God took a piece of him, a rib, and formed a woman, Eve. Together they were placed in a beautiful garden called Eden, a place where they could live in harmony with creation and with each other. As the sixth day ended, God looked at everything he had made, the light, the sky, the land and seas, the plants, the animals, and humankind. It was more than good, it was very good. Finally, on the seventh day, God rested. Not because he was tired, after all, he is all-powerful, but to show the importance of rest and reflection. He blessed this day and made it holy, a time to pause and appreciate the beauty of all that had been created. Imagine God looking down at the world, peaceful and perfect, filled with life and love. And imagine the stillness of that seventh day, a quiet moment of gratitude for the wonder of creation. As we bring this first story to a close, let its message settle into your heart. The story of creation is a reminder of the beauty and harmony all around. Take a deep breath and let the images of light, sky, land, and life fill your mind. Let the calm of creation guide you into a peaceful state, helping you release the worries of the day. If this story brought you a sense of comfort and peace, I invite you to stay with us on this journey. There are more stories to come, each one carefully chosen to nurture your soul and bring you closer to restful sleep. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you'll ensure you never miss a moment of these calming journeys. It also supports us in bringing more stories like this to unwind. Thank you for being here, and may you find the rest you deserve. Let's continue this journey together. Story 2: Noah's Ark and the Great Flood. Let me tell you a story, one of faith, perseverance, and renewal. This story begins in a world that had lost its way, a world that had forgotten kindness, love, and the beauty of living in harmony. But amidst the chaos, one man stood out, a man named Noah. Long ago, the earth was filled with people, but their hearts were consumed by wickedness. Violence and selfishness spread like wildfire, and the goodness God had intended for the world seemed all but lost. God looked upon the earth, and his heart was heavy. The Creator, who had made the world in love, was grieved by what it had become. He decided to start anew, to cleanse the earth and give it a fresh beginning. But even in this dark time, there was one man who remained faithful: Noah. Noah was different. He was a man of integrity who walked closely with God, listening for his voice and living a life of righteousness. God saw Noah and chose him for an extraordinary mission. One day God spoke to Noah. Can you imagine it? The voice of the Creator, filling the air, speaking directly to you. God said, "Noah, I am going to bring a great flood to cleanse the earth, but you and your family will be saved. I want you to build an ark." Now, this wasn't just any boat. The ark was to be enormous, 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. It would have 3 levels, with rooms for Noah's family and pairs of every kind of animal. God gave Noah detailed instructions, down to the type of wood to use: gopher wood. He explained how to seal it with pitch inside and out, ensuring it would float even during the fiercest of storms. Noah, trusting in God's plan, didn't hesitate. He began the massive task of building the ark, gathering wood, cutting beams, and assembling this great vessel exactly as God had commanded. As Noah worked, people around him watched in confusion. Why was he building such a massive boat on dry land? Surely, they thought, he had lost his mind. Noah tried to warn them. He told them about the coming flood and urged them to turn away from their wicked ways, but the people laughed at him. They mocked his warnings, continuing in their selfish and violent ways. Can you imagine how lonely Noah must have felt, surrounded by disbelief and ridicule? Yet he remained steadfast, trusting in God's word even when no one else did. Finally, after years of hard work, the ark was ready. Its towering structure stood as a testament to Noah's faith and obedience. But there was one final task: gathering the animals. God instructed Noah to bring 2 of every kind of animal, male and female, onto the ark. From the majestic lions to the tiny sparrows, from the lumbering elephants to the quick-footed deer, each creature came as if guided by an unseen hand. Imagine the scene: birds of every color filling the sky, their wings fluttering as they descended toward the ark. Animals of all shapes and sizes made their way, the ground trembling under the weight of elephants and the soft patter of rabbits' feet. Noah and his family worked tirelessly, ensuring each animal had a place. The ark, once empty, now teemed with life, a living sanctuary prepared for the storm to come. When everything was ready, God spoke to Noah again. "Go into the ark, you and your family, for I have found you righteous in this generation." Noah, his wife, his sons, and their wives entered the ark. As they stepped inside, the skies began to darken. Thick clouds rolled in, and the first drops of rain fell. God himself closed the door of the ark, sealing it shut. Outside, the raindrops turned into a torrential downpour, and the waters began to rise. Streams overflowed, rivers surged, and the earth was covered in a deluge. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain poured without stopping. The ark was lifted from the ground, floating on the endless waters. Everything outside was washed away, but inside the ark, Noah and his family were safe. The ark drifted on the vast expanse of water, with no land in sight. Can you picture it? The gentle rocking of the vessel, the sound of waves lapping against its wooden sides, the occasional call of a bird inside. Inside the ark, Noah and his family cared for the animals. They fed them, tended to their needs, and waited patiently for the rain to stop. The days stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months, but Noah never lost faith. Finally, the rain stopped. The skies began to clear, and the sun peeked through the clouds, but the waters were still high, covering everything. The ark continued to float, waiting for the waters to recede. After many months, Noah sent out a raven to see if the waters had gone down. The raven flew back and forth, but didn't find a place to land. Then Noah sent out a dove. The dove returned with nothing, a sign that the waters still covered the earth. 7 days later, Noah sent the dove out again, and this time it returned with a freshly plucked olive leaf in its beak. Noah's heart must have leapt with joy. The olive leaf was a sign that life was returning to the earth. Finally, Noah sent the dove out one last time, and it didn't return, meaning it had found a place to settle. When the waters finally receded, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. God spoke to Noah, saying, "Come out of the ark, you and your family, and bring out every living creature." As Noah and his family stepped off the ark, they stood in awe of the fresh, quiet world before them. The air felt crisp and clean, the sky seemed wider and bluer, and the earth was a blank canvas, ready for a new beginning. But it wasn't just the beauty of this renewed world that moved them, it was the overwhelming sense of hope and gratitude. Noah, filled with thankfulness, built an altar to God. Imagine him gathering stones, placing them one by one, and then kneeling before this simple structure to offer his prayers. On this altar, he made a sacrifice, burning offerings to thank God for their survival and the new chance at life they had been given. God, pleased with Noah's faith and gratitude, blessed him and his family. He said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth." It was an invitation to rebuild, to create, and to thrive. But God didn't stop there. He made a covenant, a sacred promise, not just with Noah, but with every living creature on earth. He said, "Never again will I destroy all life by a flood." To seal this covenant, God gave a sign, the rainbow. Picture it. After the storm, as sunlight pierced through lingering raindrops, a stunning arc of colors appeared in the sky. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. A radiant reminder of God's love and faithfulness. God said, "Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it, and remember the everlasting covenant between me and all living creatures. Even now, thousands of years later, when we see a rainbow, it's hard not to feel a sense of wonder and peace. It's a moment that connects us back to this ancient story, reminding us that storms may come, but they always pass, and beauty can follow. But as inspiring as this fresh start was, rebuilding a world from scratch was no small task. Noah and his family faced challenges, planting crops, taming the wild, and creating a home in a world that was both familiar and completely new. Can you imagine what it must have been like? The quietness of the earth after the flood, the absence of bustling cities or villages. Every sound, from the rustling of leaves to the calls of animals, must have seemed louder, more profound. Still, Noah's family worked together, drawing strength from each other and their faith. They planted seeds and watched them grow, a reminder that life always finds a way to flourish. The story of Noah's Ark and the Great Flood is much more than a tale of survival. It's a story of hope, renewal, and the strength found in faith. Think about the storms in your own life. Perhaps you faced challenges that felt overwhelming, moments when you weren't sure how you'd move forward. Noah's story reminds us that even in the darkest times, there is light ahead. The ark, in many ways, is a symbol of protection. Just as God provided a safe haven for Noah, we too can find shelter. In our faith, in our relationships, and in the knowledge that no storm lasts forever. And the rainbow? It's a promise that after every storm, there's beauty waiting on the other side. As we come to the end of Noah's incredible story, let its lessons rest gently in your heart. This tale of faith, perseverance, and renewal reminds us that even in the midst of life's greatest storms, there is always hope. The ark symbolizes protection, the flood signifies cleansing, and the rainbow is a promise of beauty and peace after every trial. Take a deep breath and picture that rainbow stretching across the sky, a symbol of God's faithfulness and love. Let its colors bring you calm, guiding you closer to rest and renewal. If this story brought you peace or touched your heart in some way, I invite you to join us on this journey by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you'll ensure you never miss these calming and uplifting stories. And you'll be helping others find this peaceful space too. Thank you for being here. Let's continue this journey together, one story at a time, as we move closer to restful sleep and deeper peace. Good night, and may the promise of the rainbow bring you comfort. Story 3, David and Goliath, Courage in the Face of Giants. Next is a story of courage, unwavering faith, and triumph against all odds. A story that shows no challenge is too great when we put our trust in God. This is the story of David and Goliath, a timeless account of bravery that continues to inspire hearts across generations. Long ago in the land of Israel, there was a great army led by King Saul. They were at war with the Philistines, a powerful and fearsome enemy. Among the Philistines was a giant named Goliath, standing over 9 feet tall, clad in heavy armor and wielding a massive spear. Every day, Goliath would step forward from the Philistine camp, his voice booming as he taunted the Israelites. "Choose a man to fight me," he roared. "If he defeats me, we will be your servants, but if I defeat him, you will serve us." The Israelites trembled in fear. Who could possibly stand against such a giant? For 40 days, Goliath issued his challenge, but no one dared to step forward. The Israelites were paralyzed by fear, feeling hopeless in the face of such an overwhelming threat. In a small village nearby, a young shepherd named David tended his father's sheep. David was the youngest of his brothers, often overlooked because of his youth and small stature. But David's heart was filled with faith. He had spent countless days and nights in the fields, singing songs of praise to God and trusting Him for protection against wild animals like lions and bears. One day, David's father sent him to the battlefield to deliver food to his brothers, who were soldiers in King Saul's army. When David arrived, he heard Goliath's taunts and saw the fear on the faces of the Israelites. David couldn't understand why no one had accepted Goliath's challenge. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God, he asked. His words stirred murmurs among the soldiers, and eventually they reached King Saul. David was brought before the king. "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine," David said boldly. "Your servant will go and fight him." Saul was astonished. "You are only a boy," he replied, "and Goliath has been a warrior since his youth." But David's faith did not waver. He told Saul about the times he had fought off lions and bears while protecting his sheep. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine," David declared. Saul, moved by David's confidence, agreed to let him fight. He offered David his own armor, but it was too heavy and cumbersome for the young shepherd. Instead, David chose to face Goliath with what he knew: a sling, 5 smooth stones from a nearby stream, and his unwavering trust in God. As David approached the battlefield, Goliath laughed. "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" he sneered. But David stood firm. "You come against me with sword, spear, and javelin," David replied. "But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and all the world will know that there is a God in Israel." With that, David reached into his pouch, took out a stone, and placed it in his sling. As Goliath advanced, David swung the sling and released the stone. It flew through the air and struck Goliath square in the forehead. The giant stumbled, then fell face down to the ground. The Israelites erupted in cheers. Against all odds, the young shepherd had defeated the mighty warrior. David ran to Goliath, took his sword, and ensured the victory. The Philistine army, seeing their champion defeated, fled in fear. This story of David and Goliath teaches us that no matter how insurmountable our challenges may seem, we can overcome them with faith in God. David's courage wasn't rooted in his own strength or abilities, but in his trust in the Lord. Think about the giants in your life, the fears, doubts, or obstacles that seem too big to conquer. Like David, you don't face them alone. God is with you, ready to guide and empower you. Take a moment to reflect on David's unwavering faith. Let his story remind you that God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. When you trust Him, even the biggest giants can fall. As you drift into sleep tonight, imagine the peaceful fields where David once tended his sheep, singing praises to God under a starlit sky. Let that same sense of trust and courage fill your heart, knowing that God is always by your side. If this story encouraged you, stay with us for more tales of faith, hope, and peace. Together, we'll continue this journey toward restful sleep and spiritual renewal. Good night, and may the courage of David inspire you. Story 4: The Prodigal Son, a story of grace and redemption. Let me tell you a story of grace, redemption, and unconditional love. A story that reminds us that no matter how far we stray, we are always welcomed back with open arms. This is the story of the prodigal son. Once there was a father with 2 sons. The father was a kind, loving man who worked hard to provide for his family. He had built a good life for his children, giving them everything they needed. Yet the younger son grew restless. He longed for adventure and freedom, imagining a life far away from the responsibilities of home. One day, the younger son went to his father and said, "Father, give me my share of the inheritance now." It was an audacious request, almost as if he were saying he couldn't wait for his father to pass away. Still, the father, loving and generous, agreed. He divided his wealth and gave the younger son his share. With his newfound wealth, the younger son left home. He journeyed to a far-off land where he indulged in all the pleasures the world had to offer: lavish parties, expensive clothes, fine food. He spent his money recklessly, chasing fleeting happiness. But eventually, the money ran out. His friends disappeared, and the vibrant life he had imagined crumbled. To make matters worse, a severe famine struck the land. Desperate and alone, the younger son found work feeding pigs. An unclean and humiliating task for someone of his background. He was so hungry that he longed to eat the food meant for the pigs. One day, as he sat in the muck and despair of the pig pen, he came to his senses. "Even my father's servants have more than enough to eat," he thought. "I will return home. I'll tell my father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Please, take me back as a servant." It was a humbling decision, but the younger son resolved to act. With a heavy heart, he began the long journey home. Meanwhile, back at home, the father never stopped hoping for his son's return. Day after day, he would look out on the horizon, longing to see his child again. One day, as he stood watching, he spotted a familiar figure in the distance. Could it be? Yes, it was his son. Overcome with emotion, the father ran toward him, his arms wide open. The younger son, overwhelmed by guilt and shame, began to speak. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But before he could finish, the father embraced him, holding him tightly. "Quick," the father called to his servants, "bring the best robe and put it on him. Place a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Prepare a feast, for my son who was lost has been found." As the celebration began, the older son returned from the fields. When he heard the music and saw the festivities, he was confused. A servant told him, "Your brother has come home, and your father is celebrating his return." Angry and hurt, the older son refused to join the celebration. When his father came out to plead with him, the older son said, "All these years I've worked hard for you, and I've never disobeyed your commands, yet you never gave me a feast to celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes home after squandering your wealth, you throw a party for him." The father, full of love and patience, replied, "My son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because your brother was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. This story of the prodigal son is a powerful reminder of God's grace and unconditional love. Like the father in the story, God waits for us with open arms, ready to forgive and restore us, no matter how far we've strayed or how many mistakes we've made. Perhaps you've had moments where you felt lost, where guilt or shame made it hard to imagine returning to God. This story reminds us that God's love is greater than our failures. He welcomes us back not as servants but as His beloved children. Take a moment to reflect on this story. Picture the Father running to His Son, His joy overflowing. Imagine that same love extended to you. No matter where you are or what you've done, God's grace is always there, ready to bring you home. As you rest tonight, let the message of the prodigal son bring peace to your heart. Trust in God's love and forgiveness, knowing that you are cherished beyond measure. Good night, and may the unconditional love of the Father bring you comfort. As we conclude the story of the prodigal son, let its message of grace and unconditional love linger in your heart. It reminds us that no matter how far we stray, we are always welcomed back with open arms. Let this tale of redemption guide you toward peace as you rest tonight. Now, let us continue our journey with another timeless story, one that teaches us about compassion, kindness, and the power of seeing beyond differences. This is the story of the Good Samaritan, a parable that challenges us to redefine what it means to be a neighbor. Take a deep breath and let your mind settle as we begin. Picture a quiet, winding road and a traveler on a journey, unaware of the lesson that lies ahead. Let us walk this path together and discover a story that transcends time, inviting us to live with a heart full of mercy and love. It was a quiet afternoon in a small village where Jesus was teaching. The crowds had gathered to listen to His words, hanging on to every phrase. Among the crowd, a scholar of the law stood, eager to test this teacher who was gaining such a following. With a voice both confident and questioning, the scholar asked, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus, with his calm and discerning manner, responded with a question, inviting the man to reflect. "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" The scholar answered with precision, quoting the essence of the law. "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus smiled and said, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." But the scholar, seeking to define the limits of this commandment, asked further, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus, knowing the heart of the question, began to tell a story. His voice carried the weight of a lesson that would forever redefine compassion and what it means to love. There was a man, Jesus began, traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. The road he chose was known for its danger, a steep, winding path through rocky terrain. It was a place where thieves often hid, waiting for unsuspecting travelers. As the man walked, enjoying the stillness of the desert air, shadows shifted behind the rocks. Suddenly, a group of robbers leaped out, their faces masked, their intentions clear. They attacked him viciously, leaving him bloodied and bruised. They stripped him of his clothes, took all his belongings, and fled into the wilderness. The man lay on the ground, barely conscious. The sun beat down mercilessly, the dust clinging to his wounds. He was alone, vulnerable, and on the brink of death. Not long after, Jesus continued, a priest came walking down the same road. His robes flowed as he walked with an air of authority, a man respected for his position in the temple. From a distance, the priest noticed the injured man lying in the dirt. His steps slowed as his eyes took in the scene. He hesitated, thinking, if I touch him and he's dead, I will become ritually unclean. I have important duties at the temple. I cannot afford delays. The priest glanced around nervously, fearing the robbers might still be nearby. His sense of duty to himself outweighed any sense of compassion. So, he crossed to the other side of the road, deliberately avoiding the injured man, and continued on his way. Shortly after, a Levite came down the same path, Jesus said, his voice steady. The Levite, another man with religious responsibilities, saw the traveler as he approached. He paused, his conscience tugging at him. He could see the man's injuries, deep cuts, bruises, and torn flesh. But fear clouded his judgment. What if I stop and the robbers return, the Levite thought. Helping this man could put my own life in danger. With a pang of guilt, he too crossed to the other side of the road and hurried past, leaving the man as he was. Jesus paused briefly, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Then, he continued, finally a third traveler came down the road, a Samaritan. Now you know how Samaritans are viewed. They are despised by many of us, seen as outsiders, even enemies. But this Samaritan, when he saw the injured man, didn't see an enemy. He saw a fellow human being in need. The Samaritan's heart was moved with compassion. He didn't hesitate. Kneeling beside the man, he examined the wounds, his hand steady but gentle. He poured oil and wine over them, the oil to soothe, the wine to disinfect. Then, tearing strips of cloth from his own belongings, he carefully bandaged the injuries. The Samaritan knew the man couldn't walk, so with great effort he lifted the man onto his own donkey. The journey ahead was slow and difficult, but the Samaritan walked beside the donkey, guiding it carefully, ensuring the man wouldn't be further harmed. Jesus' voice softened as he described what happened next. When they reached the nearest inn, the Samaritan didn't stop there. He stayed with the man through the night, tending to him, ensuring he was comfortable and cared for. The next morning, the Samaritan approached the innkeeper. Reaching into his bag, he pulled out 2 silver coins, a significant sum. "Take care of him," he said. "Whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I return." And with that, the Samaritan continued on his journey, leaving behind a legacy of kindness and compassion that speaks louder than any words. Jesus turned back to the scholar, his gaze steady and his words deliberate. "Now, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The scholar, perhaps uneasy with the implications of the story, replied, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus nodded and said, "Go and do likewise." This parable was more than just a story. It was a challenge, a call to action. By choosing a Samaritan as the hero, Jesus shattered the boundaries of cultural and religious prejudices. He redefined what it meant to be a neighbor, making it clear that compassion transcends labels, divisions, and societal norms. The priest and the Levite, bound by their roles and rules, chose self-preservation over mercy. But the Samaritan, despite the animosity he might have faced, chose to see the injured man as a person, not an enemy. His actions showed that love is not about who we are or where we come from, It's about what we do. Jesus' story still resonates today. It calls us to ask ourselves difficult questions. Who are the people we pass by on the roads of our lives? How often do we justify an action with fear or convenience? And most importantly, how can we choose to love our neighbors, whether they are like us or not? As you reflect on this parable, imagine yourself as the Samaritan. Picture the courage it took to stop, the effort it required to help, and the love it took to go above and beyond for someone in need. Let this story inspire you to act with kindness and compassion, no matter the cost. Let the message of the Good Samaritan settle into your heart as you prepare for rest. Breathe deeply and allow the lessons of love and mercy to guide you. Here, know that every act of kindness, no matter how small, brings light into the world. Good night. And may the spirit of the Samaritan inspire your dreams. Now take a deep breath and let your heart rest in this truth. We are all called to love our neighbors, no matter who they are. Let this love guide your thoughts as we transition to our next story. A story of courage, trust, and finding peace amidst chaos. This is the story of Jesus calming the storm, a powerful reminder that even in the most turbulent moments of life, we are never truly alone. Imagine yourself on a quiet boat, surrounded by the gentle rocking of the waves, as we embark on this next serene journey together. It had been a long day by the Sea of Galilee. Jesus had been teaching the multitudes, his voice carrying wisdom and comfort to the crowds gathered on the shore. Parables of seeds, soils, and the kingdom of heaven had stirred their hearts. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of gold and crimson, Jesus turned to his disciples and said, "Let us go over to the other side of the lake." The disciples, eager to follow their teacher, prepared the boat. Some of them, Peter, James, and John, were seasoned fishermen, accustomed to the rhythms of the sea. The boat pushed off from the shore, gliding smoothly over the tranquil waters. The evening air was cool and refreshing, and the gentle lapping of waves against the boat was soothing after the day's work. Jesus, weary from his ministry, made his way to the stern. He found a cushion, laid his head upon it, and soon fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. His breathing was steady, undisturbed by the murmurs of the disciples or the gentle swaying of the boat. As the boat moved further from the shore, the sea began to change. The wind, which had been a soft whisper, grew stronger, and dark clouds rolled across the sky, blotting out the stars. The waves that had been so calm now rose higher, their crests illuminated by flashes of lightning. Within moments, the storm erupted with a ferocity that took even the experienced fishermen by surprise. The wind howled like a wild beast and the rain poured in relentless sheets, drenching the disciples as they struggled to steady the boat. Waves crashed against the hull, tossing the vessel like a toy. Water poured in faster than they could bail it out, and the boat began to sink lower into the tumultuous sea. Panic gripped the disciples. These men who had faced storms before now felt the weight of their vulnerability. Their voices rose above the roar of the storm as they called to one another, their hearts pounding with fear. In the midst of the chaos, they turned to Jesus. There he lay in the stern, still sleeping, his face serene despite the raging tempest around him. The contrast between his calm and their terror was stark. One of them, perhaps Peter, always quick to act, rushed to him and shook his shoulder. "Master, Master," he cried, "we're going to drown. Don't you care that we're perishing?" The other disciples echoed his plea, their voices tinged with both desperation and bewilderment. How could he sleep at a time like this? Did he not see the danger? Jesus stirred, his eyes opening to the scene of chaos around him. He rose slowly, unshaken by the storm's fury. Standing in the stern, with the wind whipping his robe and the rain pelting his face, he gazed out at the angry sea. Then, with a voice of calm authority, he spoke 3 simple words: "Peace, be still." Immediately, the wind ceased its howling. The waves, which had been towering moments before, stilled, their surfaces smoothing into glass-like calm. The rain stopped, and the clouds parted, revealing a sky now tranquil and serene. The transformation was so sudden, so complete, that it left the disciples speechless. A profound silence settled over the boat, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against its sides. The sea, which had moments ago threatened to consume them, now seemed as if it had never been disturbed. Jesus turned to his disciples, his gaze steady and compassionate. "Why are you so afraid?" he asked gently. "Do you still have no faith?" The disciples exchanged glances, their fear now mingled with awe. Who was this man, they wondered, that even the wind and the waves obeyed him? They had seen him heal the sick and cast out demons, but this was something beyond their comprehension. In that moment, they began to grasp the depth of his power. Not just over illness and spirits, but over nature itself. He was no ordinary teacher or prophet. He was the Son of God, the one through whom all things were made, the Lord of creation. This story of Jesus calming the storm is more than a historical event. It is a metaphor for our lives. How often do we find ourselves in the midst of our own storms, overwhelmed by challenges, fears, and uncertainties that threaten to sink us? Like the disciples, we may feel abandoned, wondering if God sees our struggles. Yet, this story reminds us that Jesus is always with us in the boat, even when the storm rages. His presence is a promise that we are never alone, and His power assures us that no storm is beyond His control. As you reflect on this story, imagine yourself in that boat. Picture the storm around you. Perhaps it is a storm of doubt, worry, or pain. Then, see Jesus standing in the midst of it, His voice calm and commanding as He speaks, "Peace, be still." Feel the waves subside, the wind die down, and the quiet envelop you. Let His peace fill your heart, reminding you that no matter how fierce the storm, He is greater. If this story has brought you peace, I invite you to stay with us on this journey of faith and reflection. Together, we'll explore more tales of hope, courage, and the unshakable love of the one who holds all things in His hands. Good night, and may the peace of Christ calm every storm in your heart, guiding you to restful sleep. As we conclude the story of Jesus calming the storm, let its message of peace and trust linger in your heart. It reminds us that even in the midst of chaos, we are never alone, and God's power is always greater than the storms we face. Now let us turn to another inspiring story, a tale of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate redemption. This is the story of Joseph and his journey from the depths of despair to a place of extraordinary purpose. A story that demonstrates the unwavering faithfulness of God's plans. Take a deep breath and let us step into this remarkable journey together. In the land of Canaan, Jacob, also called Israel, had 12 sons, among them Joseph, born to him in his old age through his beloved wife Rachel, was his favorite. To show his love, Jacob gifted Joseph a coat of many colors, a garment so beautiful and unique that it set Joseph apart from his brothers. But this special treatment stirred envy in the hearts of his older brothers. Each time they saw Joseph wearing the coat, they were reminded of their father's favoritism. Their jealousy grew into resentment, which only deepened when Joseph shared his dreams. "Listen to this dream I had," Joseph said eagerly one morning. "We were binding sheaves of grain in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers glared at him. "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" But Joseph's dreams didn't end there. He later told them, "I had another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." Even his father rebuked him. "Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" Though Jacob scolded Joseph, he also kept the dreams in mind, wondering what they might mean. One day Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were grazing the family's flocks near Shechem. As Joseph approached them in the distance, his brothers saw him and their jealousy boiled over. "Here comes that dreamer," one of them said. "Let's kill him and throw him into one of these pits. We'll say a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." Reuben, the eldest, intervened. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben planned to rescue Joseph later and return him to their father. When Joseph arrived, his brothers seized him, tore off his colorful coat, and threw him into an empty cistern. As Joseph pleaded for mercy, they sat down to eat, their hearts hardened by jealousy. Just then, a caravan of Ishmaelite traders approached, their camels laden with spices, balm, and myrrh. Judah, another brother, had an idea. "What will we gain if we kill our brother? Let's sell him to these Ishmaelites. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." The brothers agreed. They pulled Joseph from the cistern and sold him for 20 pieces of silver. As the caravan disappeared into the horizon, taking Joseph to Egypt, the brothers felt a mix of relief and guilt. To cover their tracks, they slaughtered a goat and dipped Joseph's coat in its blood. They brought it to their father, saying, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." Jacob recognized the coat immediately. "It is my son's robe," he cried. "A ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Overcome with grief, Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for many days. No one could comfort him. Meanwhile, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Though a slave, Joseph worked diligently, and the Lord was with him, blessing everything he did. Potiphar noticed Joseph's exceptional abilities and integrity, putting him in charge of his household. But trouble soon found Joseph. Potiphar's wife, captivated by his handsome appearance, tried to seduce him. "Come to bed with me," she demanded. Joseph refused. "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" he said. Day after day she pursued him, but Joseph remained steadfast. One day, when no one else was around, she grabbed his cloak and insisted he lie with her. Joseph fled, leaving his cloak in her hands. Humiliated and enraged, she falsely accused him of trying to assault her. Potiphar, believing her lies, had Joseph thrown into prison. Even in the depths of prison, Joseph's faith in God did not falter. The Lord was with him, granting him favor in the eyes of the warden, who entrusted Joseph with managing the other prisoners. Among the inmates were Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker. who had been imprisoned for offending their king. One night, both men had troubling dreams. Seeing their distress, Joseph said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer described his dream. A vine with 3 branches blossomed and produced grapes, which he pressed into Pharaoh's cup. Joseph explained, "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position. When that happens, please remember me and speak to Pharaoh on my behalf." Encouraged, the baker shared his dream. 3 baskets of bread on his head, with birds eating from the top basket. Joseph's interpretation was somber. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will execute you, and birds will eat your flesh. Both interpretations came true. Yet when the cupbearer was restored to his position, he forgot about Joseph. 2 years later, Pharaoh had 2 disturbing dreams. In one, 7 fat cows were devoured by 7 thin, ugly cows. In the other, 7 healthy heads of grain were swallowed by 7 thin, scorched heads of grain. None of Pharaoh's magicians could interpret the dreams. The cupbearer suddenly remembered Joseph. "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings," he told Pharaoh. "A young Hebrew in prison interpreted my dream, and it came true." Pharaoh summoned Joseph. Standing before the king, Joseph humbly said, "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Joseph explained that the dreams foretold 7 years of abundance in Egypt, followed by 7 years of severe famine. He advised Pharaoh to appoint a wise man to oversee the storage of grain during the plentiful years, to prepare for the famine. Pharaoh, impressed by Joseph's wisdom and the Spirit of God in him, made him second in command over Egypt. Joseph, once a slave and prisoner, was now dressed in fine robes, given Pharaoh's signet ring, and tasked with saving the nation. As the famine spread, Jacob sent his sons to Egypt to buy grain. When they arrived, they bowed before Joseph, not recognizing him as their brother. Joseph, however, recognized them immediately. He concealed his identity, testing their character to see if they had changed. Joseph accused them of being spies and demanded they bring their youngest brother Benjamin to prove their honesty. Reluctantly, they returned to Canaan and brought Benjamin back. At one point, Joseph's emotions overwhelmed him. He left the room and wept, his heart torn between love and pain. Still, he continued testing them, hiding his silver cup in Benjamin's sack and accusing him of theft. When Judah offered to take Benjamin's place as a slave, Joseph saw the transformation in his brothers. Unable to contain himself any longer, Joseph revealed his identity. "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." His brothers were stunned, then overcome with guilt and fear. But Joseph reassured them, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph embraced his brothers, forgiving them completely. He invited Jacob and the entire family to live in Egypt, where they would be provided for during the famine. Joseph's story is a profound testament to God's sovereignty, grace, and the power of forgiveness. Despite betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment, Joseph remained faithful, trusting that God had a greater purpose. Think about the challenges in your own life. Perhaps you faced betrayal, loss, or injustice. Joseph's journey reminds us that God can use even the darkest moments to bring about redemption and blessings beyond our imagination. Tonight, as you rest, let Joseph's faith inspire you. Trust that God is with you, weaving every trial into His perfect plan. No matter what you face, His love and grace will sustain you. Let this story remind you that even when life feels uncertain, God's purpose is unwavering. As we leave behind the story of Joseph, a tale of resilience, forgiveness, and God's unwavering plan, let its quiet strength linger in your heart. It reminds us that even in moments of uncertainty, we are never beyond the reach of God's purpose. Now, let us step gently into the next chapter of our journey, a story of deliverance and hope, where God's power breaks the chains of oppression and leads His people toward freedom. This is the story of Moses and the Exodus. Close your eyes and imagine the stillness of the desert, the soft whispers of the wind, and the gentle anticipation of a promise fulfilled. Let us walk together into this sacred story. Long ago, the Israelites lived in Egypt, where they prospered and multiplied. But over time, a new Pharaoh came to power, one who did not remember Joseph or his contributions to Egypt. Fearing the growing strength of the Israelites, Pharaoh enslaved them, forcing them to labor under cruel conditions. Despite the oppression, the Israelites continued to grow in number. Enraged, Pharaoh issued a horrifying decree. Every newborn Hebrew boy was to be thrown into the Nile River. During this dark time, a Levite woman gave birth to a son. Seeing that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. When she could no longer hide him, she crafted a basket from papyrus, coated it with tar and pitch, and placed her baby inside. With a prayer in her heart, she set the basket among the reeds along the Nile. The baby's sister, Miriam, watched from a distance as the basket floated down the river. Soon, Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe in the Nile. When she saw the basket and the crying infant inside, her heart was moved with compassion. "This must be one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Miriam approached boldly. "Shall I fetch a Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you?" she asked. Pharaoh's daughter agreed, and Miriam brought their mother, who was secretly able to nurse and care for her own son. Pharaoh's daughter later adopted the boy and named him Moses, meaning drawn out of the water. Moses grew up in the palace, surrounded by Egyptian royalty. Yet he never forgot his heritage. One day, as a young man, Moses saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. Outraged, Moses struck the Egyptian and killed him. Realizing his act had been discovered, Moses fled Egypt to the land of Midian, where he built a new life as a shepherd and married Zipporah, the daughter of a Midianite priest. Years passed, and Moses likely thought he would spend the rest of his life in obscurity. But God had a greater plan. One day, as Moses tended his father-in-law's sheep near Mount Horeb, he saw an extraordinary sight. A bush that was engulfed in flames, yet did not burn up. Curious, Moses approached the bush. Suddenly a voice called out, "Moses! Moses!" "Here I am," Moses replied. "Do not come any closer," the voice said. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Moses hid his face, afraid to look at God. "I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt," God said. "I have heard their cries, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them and bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey. I am sending you, Moses, to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Moses was stunned. "Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" he asked. God reassured him, "I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." Still, Moses hesitated. "What if they do not believe me or listen to me?" he asked. God performed miraculous signs to strengthen Moses' faith, turning his staff into a snake and making his hand leprous, then healing it. Despite this, Moses protested, "I am slow of speech and tongue." "Who gave human beings their mouths?" God replied. "Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and teach you what to say." When Moses continued to plead, God appointed Aaron, Moses' brother, to be his spokesperson. Together, they would confront Pharaoh and lead the Israelites to freedom. Moses and Aaron returned to Egypt and stood before Pharaoh. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." Pharaoh scoffed. "Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Pharaoh's defiance brought harsher labor upon the Israelites, deepening their despair. But God reassured Moses, "I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you and redeem you with an outstretched arm." Then began a series of 10 devastating plagues, each demonstrating God's power over Egypt's false gods. The Nile turned to blood. Frogs invaded the land. Gnats swarmed everywhere. Flies filled the houses. Livestock perished. Boils afflicted the people. Hail destroyed crops and livestock. Locusts devoured whatever was left, and darkness covered the land for 3 days. Each time Pharaoh hardened his heart, refusing to let the Israelites go. The 10th and final plague was the most severe: the death of every firstborn in Egypt. To protect his people, God instructed the Israelites to sacrifice a lamb and smear its blood on the door frames of their homes. This sign would cause the angel of death to pass over them, sparing their firstborn. That night, a wail of grief rose throughout Egypt as the firstborn of every household, from Pharaoh's palace to the humblest hut, was struck down. Pharaoh finally relented. "Go," he told Moses and Aaron. "Leave my people, you and the Israelites. Take your flocks and herds and go." The Israelites left Egypt in haste, carrying with them the wealth of the Egyptians, who gave them gold, silver, and clothing. They set out on a journey toward the Promised Land, guided by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. But Pharaoh's heart hardened once more. He pursued the Israelites with his army, trapping them at the edge of the Red Sea. Fear gripped the Israelites. "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die?" they cried. Moses replied, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." At God's command, Moses stretched out his staff over the sea, and a strong east wind blew all night, parting the waters and creating a dry path. The Israelites crossed safely, walls of water towering on either side. When Pharaoh's army pursued them, God caused the waters to crash back, drowning the soldiers and chariots. The Israelites stood in awe, realizing the magnitude of God's power and deliverance. The Israelites' journey was far from over. In the wilderness, they faced challenges that tested their faith: hunger, thirst, and the temptation to turn back to Egypt. Yet, God provided manna from heaven, water from a rock, and His constant presence. At Mount Sinai, God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, establishing a covenant with His people. "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt," He declared. "You shall have no other gods before me." Despite their deliverance, the Israelites often wavered in faith. They built a golden calf, grumbled against Moses, and doubted God's promises. Yet, through it all, God remained faithful, guiding them toward the land He had promised. The story of Moses and the Exodus is a profound testament to God's power, faithfulness, and mercy. It reminds us that no matter how insurmountable our challenges may seem, God is always working to deliver us and fulfill His promises. As you reflect on this story, consider the ways God has guided you through your own Red Sea moments. Perhaps you've faced obstacles that seemed impossible to overcome. Let this story remind you that God is with you, parting the seas of difficulty and leading you to freedom. Tonight, as you rest, picture the Israelites crossing the Red Sea, the waters towering above them, and God's presence lighting their path. Let this image bring you peace, knowing that the same God who delivered them is with you, guiding you through every trial. Let your heart be filled with gratitude for His unending love, for His faithfulness, and for the peace that only He can bring. Whisper a quiet thank you to Him, trusting that His hand is upon your life, guiding you forward, even as you sleep. May the same peace that calmed the Red Sea rest over you now, and may your dreams be filled with the promise of His goodness and love. Good night, and thank you, Lord, for your unshakable presence and unending grace. Amen. Now, as you breathe deeply and rest in the quiet stillness of this moment, we step into another tale of faith. One that reveals the power of trust, obedience, and divine intervention. It is a story of walls that seemed impenetrable, yet fell with a simple act of faith and a mighty shout. Let the peace of Moses' journey carry you softly into this next chapter, where Joshua and the Israelites show us the strength found in waiting on God's perfect timing. Take another deep breath. Feel the stillness and allow your mind to follow the sound of distant trumpets as we approach the story of the walls of Jericho. And after the death of Moses, God chose Joshua to lead the Israelites into the promised land. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but the time had come to claim the land that God had promised to Abraham's descendants. As they approached Jericho, a city fortified with massive walls, Joshua faced a daunting challenge. Jericho was heavily guarded, and its walls seemed impenetrable. Yet, God assured Joshua of victory. "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men," God said. He then gave Joshua a seemingly unusual strategy. March around the city with all the armed men once for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast, have all the people give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the people will go up, every man straight in. Joshua, trusting in God's word, relayed these instructions to the Israelites. The plan was unconventional, but the people obeyed, trusting that God's ways, though mysterious, would bring them victory. On the first day, the Israelites gathered early in the morning. Armed men led the procession, followed by 7 priests carrying ram's horns, then the Ark of the Covenant, and finally the rear guard. Together they marched around the city once in silence, with only the sound of the priests' trumpets filling the air. Inside Jericho, the residents watched with a mixture of fear and confusion. Why weren't the Israelites attacking? Why were they simply marching? The sight of the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence, only heightened their unease. After completing the circuit, the Israelites returned to their camp. The same routine continued on the second day, the third, and so on. Day after day, they marched in silence, their trust in God unwavering. On the seventh day, the Israelites rose at dawn, knowing this day would be different. They marched around the city, not once, but 7 times. The tension was palpable, both among the Israelites and within the walls of Jericho. As they completed the 7th circuit, Joshua commanded the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." The priests blew their trumpets, and the Israelites raised a mighty shout. At that moment, the unthinkable happened. The walls of Jericho trembled, then crumbled into ruins. The impenetrable fortress was reduced to rubble, and the Israelites surged forward, claiming the city as God had promised. Joshua had given specific instructions regarding Jericho. The city and all within it were to be devoted to the Lord. The Israelites were not to take any of the plunder for themselves, for Jericho was to be a sacred offering to God. Only Rahab, the prostitute who had hidden Israelite spies and shown faith in God, and her family were spared. As the city fell, the Israelites marveled at God's power and faithfulness. It wasn't their strength or weapons that had brought victory. It was their obedience to God and their unwavering faith in His promises. The story of Jericho is a powerful reminder of what can happen when we trust and obey God, even when His plans seem beyond our understanding. The Israelites didn't conquer Jericho through military might, but through faith and reliance on God's power. Think about the walls in your own life, the obstacles that seem too great to overcome. Perhaps you're facing challenges that feel insurmountable, much like the Israelites standing before Jericho's towering walls. This story reminds us that no matter how impossible a situation may seem, God is capable of bringing those walls down. 1. Trust in God's timing. The Israelites had to march in silence for 6 days before seeing any results. Sometimes God asks us to wait and trust Him, even when progress isn't immediately visible. 2. Obedience brings victory. The Israelites followed God's instructions precisely, even though they didn't fully understand them. Their obedience opened the door for God's miraculous intervention. 3. Faith overcomes fear. The walls of Jericho were intimidating, and the enemy inside was formidable. Yet, the Israelites chose faith over fear, trusting that God was greater than any obstacle. 4. God's power, not ours. The victory at Jericho was a testament to God's power, not human strength. It reminds us to rely on Him, especially when faced with challenges beyond our capabilities. As you reflect on this story, consider the walls in your life that may need to come down. Are you holding on to fear, doubt, or resistance? Like the Israelites, we are called to trust in God, even when the path ahead is unclear. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, imagine yourself standing before Jericho's walls. Picture God leading you, guiding you with His wisdom and strength. Hear the sound of the trumpets, feel the ground tremble, and watch as the walls crumble, not through your effort, but through His power. Let this story remind you that with God, no wall is too high, no obstacle too great, and no victory too far out of reach. Let this story remind you that with God, No wall is too high, no challenge too great, and no victory too far out of reach. Take a deep breath, release your worries, and rest in the knowledge that the same God who brought down the walls of Jericho is with you now, guiding you through every trial. Good night, and may the story of Jericho inspire your faith and fill your heart with peace. As we leave behind the story of the walls of Jericho, let its echoes of faith and obedience linger in your heart. The mighty shout that brought the walls crumbling down reminds us of the incredible things God can do when we trust and follow His guidance. Now let us step gently into our final story of the night, a tale not of battles or walls, but of quiet courage in the face of great peril. This story takes us into the heart of a royal palace where one woman's bravery and faith became the salvation of an entire people. Take a deep breath, settle into the stillness of this moment, and allow your mind to journey into the grand halls of Persia, where a young queen named Esther found her purpose in a time of great need. Let us walk together into this final chapter of hope, courage, and divine providence. Long ago, in the vast Persian Empire, there lived a Jewish girl named Hadassah, better known by her Persian name, Esther. She was an orphan, raised by her kind and wise cousin Mordecai. Though their people were exiles, they remained faithful to their God. At this time, King Xerxes ruled over the Persian Empire. When his queen, Vashti, defied his orders, Xerxes removed her from her position and sought a new queen. Beautiful young women from across the empire were brought to the palace, and among them was Esther. Her grace and beauty won the king's favor, and she was crowned queen. Yet Esther's royal position came with a secret: she was Jewish. Mordecai had warned her not to reveal her heritage, knowing that anti-Semitism lingered in the empire. Mordecai, who often sat at the king's gate, uncovered a dangerous plot. Haman, an ambitious and powerful official in Xerxes' court, had risen to prominence. He demanded that everyone bow to him, but Mordecai, a devout Jew, refused. This act of defiance enraged Haman, who devised a sinister plan not just to punish Mordecai, but to annihilate all the Jewish people in the empire. Haman convinced King Xerxes to issue a decree that on a certain day, all Jews, men, women, and children, would be killed. The decree spread across the empire, plunging the Jewish community into mourning and despair. Mordecai sent word to Esther, urging her to intervene with the king and plead for her people's lives. But approaching the king uninvited was dangerous. Even as queen, Esther risked her life by doing so, for anyone who entered the king's presence without being summoned could be executed unless the king extended his golden scepter. When Mordecai's plea reached Esther, she wrestled with fear, but his words gave her strength. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Moved by Mordecai's faith and conviction, Esther made a bold decision. She sent word to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." On the 3rd day, Esther dressed in her finest royal robes and approached the throne room. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the king's presence, but Xerxes, seeing her, extended his golden scepter. "What is it, Queen Esther?" he asked. "What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." Esther did not immediately reveal her request. Instead, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet. At the banquet, she invited them to another feast the following day, saying she would reveal her request then. Meanwhile, Haman's hatred for Mordecai grew. He ordered a gallows to be built, intending to hang Mordecai the next morning. That night, the king could not sleep. He ordered the royal chronicles to be read to him and was reminded of a time when Mordecai had uncovered a plot to assassinate him. Realizing that Mordecai had never been rewarded, the king asked Haman the next morning how a man the king delighted to honor should be treated. Thinking the king meant to honor him, Haman suggested an extravagant parade through the city. To his horror, the king commanded him to lead Mordecai, dressed in royal robes, through the streets of Susa, proclaiming, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Humbled and enraged, Haman returned to the palace, only to attend Esther's second banquet. At the banquet, King Xerxes asked Esther once more, "What is your petition? It will be granted you." With courage born of fasting and prayer, Esther revealed the truth. "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." The king was stunned. "Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther pointed to Haman, an adversary, an enemy. "This vile Haman." Overcome with fury, the king stormed out into the palace garden. When he returned, he found Haman pleading for his life at Esther's feet. Enraged, the king ordered Haman to be executed on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. The king issued a new decree, allowing the Jews to defend themselves against their enemies. On the appointed day, the Jewish people triumphed, and the threat of annihilation was turned into a day of celebration and victory. Esther's bravery and faith saved her people, and the festival of Purim was established to commemorate their deliverance. As we close the story of Esther, let its profound lessons settle gently in your heart. Her courage and faith remind us that even in the face of fear and uncertainty, we are never truly alone. God is always with us, guiding us toward His purpose and giving us strength for the moments we need it most. Now, as you prepare to rest, imagine the quiet halls of the palace fading into the soft glow of a starlit sky. Let the calm of Esther's unwavering trust wrap around you like a warm blanket. Picture God's hand gently holding yours, whispering His promise that He is near, always watching over you. Take a deep breath and release the worries of the day. With each exhale, let the peace of His presence fill your heart, steady your mind, and ease your soul. You are safe, loved, and cherished beyond measure.